please consider supporting the channel today. If you follow the link below to take you to a secured site, and you can donate any amount you want. Thank you for your consideration for that. Watch the video all the way through. I'll show you some amazing things about the NASDAQ. In my next video, I'll be covering the S&P 500, looking at the VIX, and a few other things. NASDAQ 100 is following Nvidia, and Nvidia has already peaked, putting in a short-term top. I still think it's going to go higher in the coming months ahead, and then I think it's going to get a major top, and that's around the trend line in the weekly time frame. And this trend line, depending on when we come into contact, they might be around the same area for the large broadening formation. But NASDAQ doing right now, Nvidia and Bitcoin did already, and that is getting this little double top pattern, or if we exclude the shadow, it's a little head and shoulders, but a little double top pattern here. And we turned off of major resistance with the divergence, a multiple point triple negative divergence. That's exactly what NASDAQ has right now. It's exactly what Bitcoin did. It had a triple divergence. And they both formed double tops. Nvidia formed a double top. Bitcoin formed a double top. Now, I think Nvidia is getting a lower high as we're about to get a bearish realignment of the moving average trio, as I call it, the 10, 20, and 50 period moving average. NASDAQ's made a new high. Bitcoin or Nvidia has not. They both have these massive broadening formations. Often diverge at turning points. They did back here at the beginning of it. We saw a lower high right here in July of 2024 for Nvidia, where NASDAQ moved to a new high, and that ended up giving us a sell-off. So first, Nvidia and Bitcoin formed triple negative divergences and sell-off. Bitcoin sold off nearly 14%. Nvidia sold off about 11.25%. And NASDAQ's now doing the same thing and forming a double top pattern, and we have this massive broadening formation from the same period in the summer of 2024. The massive broadening formation. I think you come back down to the high, the previous high, at our February peak, and I think you move there or towards the 200 period moving average, and then I think you get one more push higher. A buy the dip moment will come. It's looking like the Fed meeting. If we get the rate cut, as Fed Fund Futures is anticipating, could it be a sell the news event? We've already had the rally. So you get the broadening formation on the NASDAQ, you get the broadening formation on Nvidia, and you got a potential double top. Let me just show you close up. And here's Nvidia up close, and I talked about this possibility of a double top with the lower high or higher high. Bitcoin got the higher high, Nvidia got the lower high. We were just slightly below the previous peak there in early August. This double top pattern where you pull back up into the trading range to fill the gaps right here and right here, and now we have filled those gaps. Previously I talked about the bottoming candlestick over here, the bottoming tail, and the inverted hammer, and again we've had this rally back up, and I talked about filling these gaps and testing the moving averages. We're doing that as the 10 crosses the 50. The 10 is a red line, the 50 is a green line, and the 20 is about to cross below it. And when that happens, you'll have a bearish realignment of the moving averages that will likely allow our double top pattern to play out and come back and take out this low and give us another lower high. Bitcoin's doing the exact same thing. It's rallied back up. It's just above the 50 period moving average. We can rally back up to it. Nvidia has overthrown the 50 as well. 20 has not yet crossed below the 50. We've already had that happen on Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin put its double top in a little bit earlier than Nvidia. We had a peak in July. Bitcoin went up to a higher high in August, peaking a day after the NASDAQ on August 14th. NASDAQ peaked on August 13th. The Nvidia chart peaked right around that same time, I think just a few days earlier. But Bitcoin's doing exactly what Nvidia is doing. We had this double top pattern. It measures down to the 100,000 area. And if you want to see my latest Bitcoin video, I did one earlier today. I'll link it at the end of this video. Got some really interesting indicators for Bitcoin. You might want to check it out. But we had the topping tail there in July, and then we got this reversal. We slammed into major resistance in the weekly time frame, major trend lines of resistance. So we broke down. Now we pull back up to the 50-period moving average. We're hitting the upper Bollinger Band, just like we did back over here, just like we did back over here. So again, we're forming a bear flag, by the way. We'll see how Bitcoin closes. It's kind of overthrowing the upper boundary. I'm connecting these two peaks right here. It's kind of overthrowing it a little bit, but we could end up with a doji or some type of spinning top or reversal or a little topping tail or something if we get the bear flag playing out. But I found it interesting. NASDAQ's doing the same thing as Bitcoin. Again, it moved just above this high right here. And that's what we've done now with the NASDAQ. Nvidia just below the previous high. And again, this followed. We dropped nearly 14%, moving down towards the 50-period moving average, moving to the 100-period moving average. So again, going to be watching. Are we forming a bear flag continuation with Bitcoin and the stock market begins to play catch up as we have S&P slamming into resistance and a potential double top on the S&P is slamming into resistance and a potential double top on the NASDAQ, very similar to what we had over here with Bitcoin. And again, time Bitcoin leads. It has a positive correlation with the market. There are periods of decoupling, but it often leads. It often begins to reverse at tops and bottoms before the market does. Sometimes they bottom out together, like at the April 7th low. Other times they don't. Bitcoin leads. Now here's the NASDAQ 100. NASDAQ 100 yesterday moved above the August 13th high. That black candlestick, we had a sell-off of 4.28%. We pulled back up, and now we've moved slightly above that, and you have a potential double top on the NASDAQ 100, very similar to what Bitcoin got back at its peak, August peak, when NASDAQ peaked back over here. Bitcoin peaked at that same time. If we turn down here off of the upper Bollinger Band, then you have a potential double top. And why do you get double tops? Often will throw over this level, the previous peak. Nvidia didn't do it, but usually you do. And you overthrow this level, you trigger all the stops that are right there, and then you end up getting a failed breakout. You run out of buyers and you reverse. We're right at the upper Bollinger Band here, and that was where we had that black candlestick the last time. I was showing you Bitcoin reversed off of the upper Bollinger Band, and even before the last time we reversed, again over here in July, on the July 31st peak, that's where we turned, is at that upper Bollinger Band. Now, Nvidia had triple negative divergence at the top. Bitcoin had triple negative divergence at the top. We now have triple negative divergence on the NASDAQ, quadruple negative divergence on the S&P. Triple and quadruple negative divergence is the strongest reversal signal in technical analysis. In addition to the divergence on the RSI, we've got this divergence that gave us the 4.28% sell-off. Okay, and then we've turned back up. We're not moving to a new high on the MACD. We are with price, and you've got a larger divergence, meaning we're probably going to get a bigger sell-off than what we had over here with the 4.28% sell-off with tech. And again, distribution into the rallies. So we're probably going to get one here that's probably going to give us a bigger sell-off, probably back towards the February high, as I said, or moving closer towards the 200-period moving average. I do think a buy-the-dip moment will take place. I do not believe the NASDAQ and the S&P are topping out right here or have topped yet, even if we sell off. We'll pull back, and then I think we'll get the final climax rally. We're in the final phase of the blow-off top from the April lows, but final climax rally will likely be after this next sell-off. As you know, I've talked about this Nvidia channel for a very, very long time. I believe I've drawn a parallel boundary from the lows over here. We slightly breached it there, but I've drawn a parallel boundary from that, and we came up to hit that level in June of 2024, the beginning of the broadening formation, the first leg higher in a 5-point reversal, and we came up to just under it there at the highs, and then we sold off, went back up to it, and peaked there in August, and early August, and I think we're selling off. We're going to form this broadening formation right into that trend line I think that that will mark the top for Nvidia. I think it will mark the top for the stock market because the NASDAQ does follow Nvidia. Now they're diverging, which is what happens at short-term peaks and sometimes major tops and bottoms. I think Nvidia is forming a broadening formation here in the weekly time frame into that level. We came up and slammed up into it just underneath it at the August peak there. And right there, if you connect those highs, it's at the same level where that trend line is coming into play. Depending on when we reach it, I think we'll mark the Nvidia top. Maybe that's November or December. I think we sell off more, and then I think we go back and reach that. And then I think Nvidia is coming all the way back down to this trend line right in here. And I think that will, whoops, I didn't draw that out enough. I think it'll go on into likely into 2027. And I think you're going to come back and take out the lows over here in 2022. And I think Nvidia is going to drop 80 or 90%, a little bit higher than this level, coming back up to test this or taking it out and dropping more than 90%. I think it's going to end up going up towards the $200 level, and then I think it's going to top out. With the rise off of this low in April, again, we had a trend line. I told you when that trend line broke, we'd likely see Nvidia begin to sell off. We've seen that. Nvidia's dropped 11.25%. It's rebounding back up to fill the gaps right now and test some moving averages. I told you the stock market would likely follow. Right now, Nvidia made a lower high. NASDAQ 100 made a higher high. They're diverging, and that's exactly what we had happen back over here in July and June and July of 2024. They diverged. That was followed by this. With the rally off the April low, I told you we had this trend line that we found support at over and over again. I told you when that trend line breaks, likely see a peak in Nvidia. We did in early August. Tested it and got a slightly lower high there with the Nvidia earnings with the long leg doji, likely now getting another lower high. Break of the trend line has opened the door to this sell-off, and the stock market is likely going to follow Nvidia and Bitcoin's lead. 5 weeks ago, I was warning you as we were rallying into resistance with Nvidia that we had an 8 of a 9 count. The following week, I told you that we completed the 9 count with Nvidia in the weekly time frame. I had warned you when we break the rising trend line that you're going to see the market end up selling off if Nvidia broke the trend line and started to sell off. Nvidia's already started to sell off. It's not moving to a new high. NASDAQ is. They're diverging just like they did back over here in June and July. Nvidia made a lower high, NASDAQ made a higher high, and you have the same thing going on right here, right now, and that was followed by the July sell-off. July of 2024. We've got another 9 count. These 9 counts on the weekly time frame have played out. Here, the 8 bar was the high of the count. You sold off there in July of 2024, or actually June we peaked. With Nvidia. Here we marked the day of the 9 count, went back and tested it, but you got the sell-off here from late 2024. Again, eventually, Nvidia diverged with the NASDAQ once again. NASDAQ made a new high in February. Nvidia did not. Now you've got the same thing going on. These previous highs back here in June and July of 2024, back over here at the February top, Nvidia diverged with the NASDAQ each time. It doesn't always do that, but it is right now. So I think you're pulling back, and this is our weekly chart right here. I thought Nvidia would end up getting a sell-off with earnings. It did, and it got a double top pattern. A little harder to see here in the weekly time frame, but I think Nvidia is headed back here likely towards the 50-week moving average, or maybe the cloud here. I think you're probably going to move back towards the 140 to 150 area, maybe lower if we move towards the cloud. The 9 counts have marked significant sell-offs, with Nvidia. Here we have a 9-9 signal. We had a 9, and we had an immediate trend extension with the very next weekly bar, and that's given us a 9-9, which is a reversal pattern. Because we didn't have the sell-off with this 9 count, the 9-9 is going to likely give you a bigger sell-off, and it could look something like what we had over here in 2024, the summer of 2024. Remember, it was the 9 count in the daily time frame that helped me correctly call the bottom for Nvidia and helped me predict a bottom for the NASDAQ when it hit key support. We're also at some support levels for Nvidia as well, as I talked about back at the time. I think Nvidia is suggesting a counter trend that we're going to end up getting a bigger sell-off. I think Bitcoin's in a counter trend. I think it'll get a bigger sell-off. But I do think Nvidia and Bitcoin will still move to new highs. I think NASDAQ's going to follow the S&P or follow Nvidia and then eventually follow it back up to make new highs to complete the broadening formation. I don't think the broadening formation is done yet with Nvidia, and I don't think it's going to finish right here yet with the NASDAQ. Now, previously we had the black candlesticks here and here. I told you again, candlesticks are meaningless unless they get confirmed and get a follow through. But now you're at the upper Bollinger Band. We talked about the possibility of a double top if we did make new highs. Signals have reverted back to bullish for most indicators on NASDAQ. Signals have turned back to bullish, but we're at that upper Bollinger Band and a potential double top, very similar to what we saw in Bitcoin and Nvidia. The divergence here, if we zoom out and look at these divergences on the MACD and the RSI, you can see the divergence looks very similar to the divergence that we had back over here, where we sold off and then we went back up and we made new highs and we went sideways. Now, again, we're at the upper Bollinger Band. This is where we've gotten rejection before. We've seen rejection surrounding the upper Bollinger Band many, many times in sideways type moves, but we've got to close below the Bollinger Band, and then we've got to come back down now, break this trend line. You have a series of fan lines here, really. Here we broke this trend line, came down, and then we broke that trend line and came down, each time rallying up to a slightly higher high, but then having the move fail. It failed initially here, and then it failed. And if we come back down, we take out that trend line, then again, you're likely going to move back towards the 200 period. Maybe you don't reach it. Maybe you just come to the February peak right here, and we move back towards this area and the cloud right here, dropping below the 50 period moving average, which is this green line right here. That's the lower Bollinger Band there. But if we do sell off here in September, and maybe the Fed meeting is a sell the news event, sure looking like that, because we're rallying ahead of the Fed. Then I'll be watching these levels right here that I'm talking about. I think a buy the dip is going to happen, and then we're going to go higher, finish the broadening formation, and then I think we're going to see a top. If I bring it up a little closer here, you can see the triple divergence, just like Bitcoin formed at the top, just like Nvidia formed at the top. But again, the divergence may not be done yet. We got a close above the upper band. Maybe we with the Fed, where we sold off 4.25%, so we're further away from that trend line in the weekly time frame. But S&P slamming right up into it. So do we get rejection right here with the triple negative divergence at the upper Bollinger Band? Now, NASDAQ already hit the trend line from the 2023 low with our log scaling right here. Again, we're just below that trend line because we had a 4.28% sell-off. So if we do try to rally with the Fed, you get the trend line directly overhead. Again, watch for a close below the upper Bollinger Band. Still think we're going to try to move back towards the 20-week moving average, maybe the 50 if we break this previous high right here. But again, the 50 might be closer to that level by the time we reach it. And then I think you're going to end up still rallying into November or December, where I think you're going to get the top going into this trend line up here. I think you'll see a pullback first. We've been straddling along the trend line. 4.28% sell-off, but went sideways and now slightly higher. Possible little miniature double top if we do what Bitcoin did, if we do what Nvidia did. We have a sell the news event with the rate cut from the Fed. Again, do we get a hawkish cut out of the Fed? Does the Fed cut, but then still starts showing concerns about inflation, which is ticking back up? The producer price index cooled down a little bit this time after that historic move, the strongest move in 3 years from last month. We get a hawkish cut from the Fed that ends up disappointing markets. Looks like we're getting the rally ahead of the Fed, and it looks like it's going to be a sell the news event. That's what it's looking like. I don't know if we reach this trend line. Again, our seasonality was suggesting that we would get a peak either last week or this week with the market. So far, we have a new high with NASDAQ and S&P this week. But again, I think this is happening, and I think you're getting that larger broadening formation, as I talked about with NASDAQ here, and this is where I think we're headed into this trend line, and I think these highs are pointing to the next high, and I think we reach that November or December, where I think the market is probably going to top. Could we get a cut out of the Fed? And, oh, it's not enough. The Fed cuts and maybe still has hesitation, reservations about future cuts. You see what I'm saying? Could be that there is a letdown. Eventually, you're going to get the jumbo cuts. Get a one and done out of the Fed, and they pause. That is assuming that they cut, which it looks like they will. Get a one and done, and then they kind of show they're going to go back and sit on the sidelines. It could be a huge letdown. And again, eventually we're going to get jumbo cuts in a few months from now. We're going to get it. Probably going to see a sell-off in the market, a buy the dip event, go up and make new highs, and then you're going to get this massive crash back down to these levels down here that we were at in April with Trump's Liberation Day with the tariffs. But this is where I think we're going. This is the blueprint of where I think we are going, or maybe better said, my roadmap into this trend line of resistance. Now, I say the best for last here, and I just want to show you what I'm looking at as far as the support levels. I think we pull back towards the 20-week, maybe the 50-week if we get, a pullback taking a little bit of time. I think you're pulling back towards the February high right here, okay? Maybe just beyond it. And I think you get the rally back up into this trend line, and I think you're going to top. Eventually, getting rejection at that trend line, I think you come back down and break this trend line if we don't do it ready or whatever low is there. And then I think you come back down, and I think you come back towards this level of support right here, which is the 2022 top. This is the trend line that I used to call the bottom here on the NASDAQ. S&P and Bitcoin all hit major trend lines of support. But he was saying that Bitcoin, NASDAQ, and S&P were all going to crash. Was over. I told you it was bottoming. The trend line that we're at in the weekly time frame, I'll bring it up here for you. The trend line, we've straddled along that trend line, and we're just underneath it right now. NASDAQ has a history, and so does S&P, of consolidating near the highs, the lows that either give you breakouts to the upside or breaks to the downside. But I think is what NASDAQ's going to do is it's going to do something like what we did over here in late 2021. You ended up selling off back towards the 20-week moving average, and then you pushed on up and got a new high for weeks, several weeks here, and you ended up topping out. I think you're going to see something very similar to what we had over here in 2021. That gave us a 2021 peak, by the way, for the NASDAQ, which ended up diverging with the S&P. S&P made a new high in January. NASDAQ made a lower high. They diverged, as they so often do at tops and bottoms. But this is what I think is likely going to be the case. I think you got the broadening formation for Nvidia. I think you got the broadening formation for NASDAQ. And let me just finish my thought here with this rally into the upper boundary of the broadening formation. I think when you get that, and I think that's coming in November, December, I think you're going to sell off all the way back down to this level of support right here and either set up a massive head and shoulders pattern or break it and go to the lower end of the broadening formation or towards it under the 200-week moving average. The 200-week moving average right here is at this level of support. This is where I think we're eventually going to move to. In order to have a bear market, you got to take out that 200-week moving average. Here we bounced off of it. And again, through the bull phase, you've had periods where you've pulled back towards it or dropped below it, but then rebounded. Eventually, we're going to drop below it and not be able to get back above it, but you're probably going to move towards it, and that's why I keep saying the bear market, or the crash that's going to kick off the bear market to usher in the recession, is going to be bigger than what we just witnessed here. It's going to make that look like nothing. This crash, if we do what I think we're going to do and go up here to the trend line right there, and we end up crashing back down to test this low or the low from this trend line, that crash is going to be much, much bigger than what we had over here. You pick it up what I'm throwing down. Just showing you target levels of where I think we're going. I still believe that we're going higher. I remain longer term bullish. I think we're going to get a pullback. We've been straddling along the trend line here a little bit. Here we just had a touch and rebounded. Here we just had a touch and we rebounded. Here we've been straddling along that trend line, and again, we're still likely to see selling in September. So this is my NASDAQ roadmap of where I think we're going. Got that negative number with the jobs report. I think you're going to end up seeing more positive numbers that follow it with the revision downward for the June number. But eventually, I think you're going to get a negative number. And I think that that's going to be one of the catalysts. I also think that Jamie Dimon's crack in the bond market could eventually be an issue catalyst as well.